All right, let's get started. Hey, everybody. Hope you're all having the most wonderful Friday. Hope you're all getting lots of rest. Hope you're all enjoying still learning. We are about to finish the second to last week of the free JavaScript bootcamp here with the Bad Website Club. Today's just going to be me, but it'll be a fuller house next week. And it's going to be super fun. You might have heard of the Fetch API before, and don't worry, we're going to take our time to go through it. I split this up into two sections so that we could really dive in. A little bit of echo, okay? Little echo. Let me take a quick look. Do I have the right microphone in? Tell you what, if the audio's bad, like that other time, let me know, and I will restart Chrome again. But let's just cross our fingers. Anyway, hi, my name's Ramon. My friend Jess and I run these boot camps. I actually just updated all of the playlists. So if you go to youtube.com/@badwebsiteclub, you should find all of the playlists up to date. Everything gets recorded, so there's no falling back. You can find all of the bootcamp info here at badwebsite.club. You can go here. Oh, I'm glad everything sounds okay. There you'll find a calendar, everything sorted. Oh, no, thank you for checking that the audio was okay. And last thing before we get started, by joining this bootcamp, you are agreeing to abide by our code of conduct. If you don't know it, go to bit.ly/BWC-COC. And if you see anything out of sorts, please let either myself or Jess know. Okay. Hi, Eric. Hi, everybody. Hi, Sean. I'm so glad y'all are here. Yeah, let's dive right in. So today we're going to be learning about the Fetch API and promises as a concept by building a free code camp authors page. And what I really want to do, like you can see there's not a lot of steps here, but I really want to take my time to go through this one because you might have heard of Fetch or promises before, and they probably sound a little confusing. If you haven't, don't worry. We're going to take our time, go through this. Essentially, what we're going to be learning over this series of lessons is how to dynamically get data from the internet. And the key word here is going to be API. And you've heard every now and then during this bootcamp or other places, you've seen the word API. It's an acronym that stands for Application Programming Interface. And what we're going to be doing is you're going to see how we're going to interact with APIs that live on the internet to retrieve or fetch data, but also be able to interact with that data. So we should be fine. Don't worry. We're going to take our time. Cesium, it's great to see you again. And don't worry about getting lost. Remember, please interrupt me with questions. We have lots of time. So this is what we're going to be building. Oh, thank you for confirming that the sound is fine. This is what we're going to be building. Let me refresh real quick, because what I want y'all to notice, there's a very brief moment where you don't see Quincy here listed, and that's because that is being dynamically loaded from, okay, that's very fast. Never mind. But look at all these wonderful folks working on Free Code Camp. So what's going on here is that it's dynamically going to a Free Code Camp author API and loading authors. You saw that when we clicked on, let me scroll down again. When I clicked on load more authors, what's going on is that it's in the background going and fetching more authors from the internet. Yeah. So let's dive right in. So as always, I'd like to take a brief look at our existing HTML and CSS. This is going to be very brief because I want to focus on the JavaScript itself. So here's our body with an H1. We have a main, a author container div, and a button that says load more authors. Then we just load our JavaScript. As you can see, there's not a lot going on in our HTML. In our CSS, well, I don't want to spend too much time looking at the CSS as always, but it's always interesting to see how different folks structure their CSS. It's all well and good. What I really want to focus on is our script. So as we can see, HTML and CSS are already provided for us. So what we're going to be doing, and you're going to notice that it's going to follow a pattern we're pretty familiar with by now. We're going to define some variables to hold elements. So first is author container, which holds document.getElementById author container. Notice as always with getElementById, I don't need the hashtag. If I were using query selector, I would. And the other one is load more btn, which is document get element by ID. Get element by ID, and that element is load more btn. So fairly straightforward step. Our code passes, we pat ourselves on the back, pat, and we keep going. And right away, we're going to start interacting with the fetch API. Now, before I do anything with the fetch API itself, I'd like to look up the fetch API on MDN and give you all give you all the opportunity to have this on hand as well. So in essence, using fetch is going to allow us to interact with data somewhere else on the internet. For example, the most essential part of using fetch is going to be a request to go to a URL or a website and retrieve data. This is called a GET request. You go and get something. And believe it or not, when you're using something like a browser, you're already using this kind of stuff. This is called an HTTP request, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. You might have seen the https://duckduckgo.com. What's going on there is your browser says, hey, this address, I'm going to make a fetch request. I'm going to make a GET request to ask for whatever data you have for me. And somewhere on the internet, probably somewhere in the United States or somewhere close by, if they have like servers closer by, DuckDuckGo has a program called a server. And that server is going to be like, oh, hey, a browser is asking me for stuff. I know how to respond. And what it responds with is, first of all, some HTML, some CSS, some JavaScript, some images, some fonts, and all that good stuff. But also it responds with a status. And that status has a number. You might have seen, for example, 404, not found. That's when a GET request, that's when a HTTP request goes to an address that doesn't exist, or it doesn't know what to do. It's like, hold on, there's nothing here. I'll respond with 404. 200 means okay. You might have seen 500 internal server error if something's wrong with the server. You might have seen 401, you're not allowed to be here. 403, you're kind of allowed to be here, but you're not supposed to be doing this. There's a bunch of these, and you don't need to have them memorized. In fact, there's a bunch of them. There's a couple of websites where it's like HTTP with cats or HTTP with dogs to show like the little funny pictures with each of those. Okay. Oh, Tina, 418, I am a teapot. So this is, correct me if I'm wrong, that's like a joke one or like just a random one that they put in there. But yeah, 418 is I am a teapot. But it's not just fetching data. It's not just getting data. It's also posting data. That's when you say, hey, here's some data. Could you do something with it? Oh, Kristen says it was an April Fool's joke. Good to know. Here's some data. Now, fun fact, we've actually, when we've done like web development, we've actually been doing post requests with forms. So when you submit a form, it sends a post request to a server, to an action. Remember that URL that we put in? We're saying, hey, URL, here's a post request, and here's some data. And that data comes from the form. But it's not just posting new data. It's also putting or patching. And these, I'll be honest, I usually use put. I don't use patch a lot. And put is meant to, whereas post is meant to create new data, put is meant to update existing data. There's also such a thing as a delete request. Now, we're not going to be using post, put, patch, or delete right now. We're just going to be focusing on get requests. And to make a get request, we have a built-in function into JavaScript called fetch. Now, I want to be very clear. Fetch is very specific to JavaScript. So fetch can do let me try this again. Fetch can do any kind of HTTP request or method. It can do get, post, put, patch, or delete, right? If you don't specify which method you want, then it will by default use get. Now, we're going to start by making a get request to this URL. So fetch, put in this address, and you can see authors.json. Now let's take a look at our console real quick, because we can see nothing happens. And you might think, okay, well, then let me just console log that. Notice I get an empty object. And you're probably thinking that doesn't make much sense. I want to see those authors. I want to see what data is in there. But fetch is something called asynchronous. That means that when you call fetch, it goes off to fetch the data. Oh, I love this. Pending. It's pending to get that data. So what happens is I have fetch, and then let's say I want to assign a variable. Not the best variable in the world, but bear with me. Instead of waiting for this get request to be done, instead of waiting for the server to reply with this data, it's going to immediately start evaluating the code below that. This means that it is asynchronous. Whereas, for example, assigning a variable and then assigning another variable, this is synchronous. A loop is synchronous. Calling a synchronous function is synchronous. Console logging is synchronous, but fetch is not. And there are many examples of asynchronous functions. Some we've actually used already. For example, set timeout. Oops. When we use set timeout, JavaScript doesn't actually wait 500 milliseconds and then calls the callback. JavaScript will say, cool, I'll call this in 500 milliseconds, you keep going. So it'll immediately start evaluating const apple equals apple. Set timeout is asynchronous. Now, here's a cool thing about APIs and URLs. This here is a page we can visit on the internet. Tell you what, let's go open it. Now I'm going to zoom in a little because this is quite small. Now you might have noticed at the end of the URL said JSON, and that's because we have JSON data. Check it out. Each of these is an object. You see we have author Quincy Larson, image, big URL, blah, 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 bio, the teacher who founded freecodecamp.org. Next, JSON object, author Jessica Wilkins, image, blah, 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 URL, I'm a musician and a programmer. Oh, Kristen is asking, so we don't need to use async when we use fetch. We don't? We haven't learned async yet. So I'm actually gonna bookmark that question. I'm sorry, Kristen. Like, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. So I'm just gonna bookmark it. But to answer your question briefly, you don't have to use async. That's where promises come in. But more in a bit. So okay, we fetch the data, but we can't really interact with it yet. That's what we're gonna find out next what to do. But for now, I should not have a semicolon after my... See, friends, this is why you read the instructions. I have a semicolon there, and it should not be there. You might be wondering why. We usually end our lines with a semicolon. The thing is, we're not yet done writing this line. So now it passes, pat. Let's keep going. So now we're going to talk about promises. And this is where things get a little bit weird. When we call an asynchronous function, it returns something called a promise. And fetch, for example, is one such function that does this. And what it is an object that will either be correctly done, this has been correctly done, or hey, something happened, we got to look into why. This is running in the background, and once it's done, we can figure out what we want to do with it. So for example, in our case here, the way promises work is that we can say, hey, we can call the then method on a promise to say, hey, once you're done, do some stuff. Now, then takes as an argument a callback. And this callback itself has a parameter in it, which holds you might see res here. But because it's a callback, we can call it whatever we like. We can call it response. We can call it, I wouldn't call it data. You'll see why. Let's go with what they would like. They would like us to use res. Oh, another thing, you can call it on separate lines, which I like. So there we go. Let's see what happens now. You're going to see, well, nothing happens yet. However, let's console log res. Still an empty object. But because FreeCodeCamp's console logging works a little bit different from the browser's console logging itself, let's try something else. So now we're getting this response empty object, but if I go to inspect, check it out. I can actually look into this response object itself. And now we can see a bunch of other stuff. For example, status. Remember I mentioned the status, 200. We can see the URL that we made a fetch request to. We can see headers. This is a bunch of browser information that I'm not going to concern us with today. What's going to be interesting is the body, which right now looks like a bunch of gnarly stuff, and that's because we still need to process the body of that response. You'll see what I mean in a moment. In fact, let's console log that body itself. So res.body. Still helpful to go into the browser's oh, my brain shut down for a second. Still helpful to go into the browser's console. We can see here it's got like a readable stream. What we need to do is read the data that's coming in from that body. And don't worry, we'll get to that in just a moment. For now, we just want to take a look at what's in there. We should log, yes, sorry. I should be logging the response. You should log the res parameter to the console so you can see the response object. To fetch call inside the fetch, add a callback function with res as a parameter. I bet it doesn't like that I left out the parameters, the parentheses. No. Let's see. You should log the res parameter to the console so you can see the response object. Stephen B says FCC or FreeCodeCamp wants implicit return syntax, but I'm not implicitly returning anything. Okay, fine. Thanks, Stephen B. I'm gonna take your question real quick. Check them. Out of topic question: is there a TypeScript course on FreeCodeCamp? Of course, I want to answer. I love questions. Let's take a quick detour here to see. FreeCodeCamp curriculum. I don't think there is one, but I could be wrong. No, I don't think that there is a TypeScript course. CSS, JavaScript. Nah. Nope, no TypeScript. But hey, if you know of any really good resources for learning TypeScript, please do. In the meantime, let's hop on. Cool. Let's talk about this real quick. So this bootcamp is free, and Free Code Camp is also free. They are a registered and nonprofit, and they depend on donations. So if you want to, don't be spending money you don't have. You can come back later if you want and donate a couple of dollars a month. Before we go into the next exercise, I'm just going to take a minute to answer a couple questions here. Response object returned contains the JSON. Yeah, so the JSON is going to be processed out of there. We're going to be calling return rest.json, as you'll see in a minute. It's like raw data, perfectly put. So, oh, Stephen B says there's a YouTube course. Free Code Camp has a YouTube course on TypeScript. Perfect. So Nojasoja is asking, where does the returned console log value go if it's in a then? Well, it's not going anywhere, which is weird. But hear me out. When I replace this with rest.json, what this is going to do is process the JSON out of. Wait, hold on. Am I blocking? No. Oh, yes, I am. When I return the response.json, rest.json returns a promise as well. Yep, sorry, folks. I just realized that that comment was covering the code. In fact, we can remove the comment. So what's going to happen next is it's going to take our response object, process it into JSON, and because it returns a promise itself, we can actually chain another then, which you'll see in just a moment. So for now, we pat. Yep, there's going to be endless promises. I want to take a minute to answer Jane's question. How do we know when it doesn't want the implicit return? I didn't know. Experimentation. It's not like it's, and I'm sorry that, oh, Tina says, Jane, I think it's if you only have one expression. Perfect. And then always returns a promise. That is absolutely correct. So in order to work with this JSON data, we're going to call the then method on that promise. This time, our parameter will be called data. And we're going to use curly braces. Now it's saying specifically, hey, use curly braces. Cool. And we're going to console log that data. I'm very excited for y'all to see what's in here. So check it out. There's the data that comes from that. So let's check our code. Looks good. I want to do one thing. I want to look at what the type of this is. It's an object. So we can, for example, since we already have that data, we can already start interacting with it. Given that it's an array, let's get the first member of that array. Hold on, my parentheses got lost. So the first member of that array is Quincy Larson. Checka makes a great point here. Fetch helps avoid the callback hell. Better some clean .then than this. Couldn't agree more. So instead of having lots of nested callbacks inside one another, we can chain these calls of then, which is super helpful. Let's move on. Stephen B is asking, why did type of return object just then? So what is the type of an array? Oh, hold on. Let me comment this out real quick. And this is something we've talked about since the very beginning of this bootcamp. Arrays are objects. Type of an array is object. And I'm sorry. I know it's annoying. Sesam is asking, what is the type of for the promise? Great question. Did I do that right? That looks right. It's an object. I'm not happy with that. I was hoping it would show promise, but I guess a promise. Hold on, am I blocking a little bit? I guess a promise is an object. Checkim says to check if an array is actually an array, there is the isArray method in JS. Okay, let's try that. Oh, it's not? Huh. Hold on a sec. Yeah. Oh, my bad. Hold on. There. There we go. Cool. Thank you, Checkum. So array.isArray and pass an array gives you true. If we pass in an object, oopsie. There we go. It's false. It looks like everything is an object. Except for primitives, everything is an object in JavaScript. Because, as Nojo Sojo says correctly, a promise is an object with the class promise. Okay. Sorry to go off topic. I always think it's interesting to look at this stuff. Now, what we're going to add is some error handling. Let's say, for example, that the server crashes or that it gives me a 500 or that it can't give me a response. What happens there is that we can catch these errors. So we're going to chain onto here. Dot catch. And just like with then, it takes a callback with a parameter of error. Wait. Do you want semicolons? Do you want curly brackets? You do not. Okay, see? Implicit return. I'm learning my lesson. So here we're going to write, Stephen B saying, all of these capitalized keywords are classes, right? That is correct. Date, promise, other things. There was an error. There we go. ERR. And now we can put a semicolon at the end. Our code, what? Hold on. Oh, I should console.error. And we've seen console.log, but we haven't seen console.error yet. This should be okay, right? It's still not. Okay. Your second then method should log data to the console. I forgot that I commented out. Sorry. Now it's good. Cool. Pat. But that's not very helpful if we can't see an error. So I'll tell you what. Let's make it make an error. And I think one of the easiest way to do that is to remove the N from JSON, make it JSO. And look. Look at this. There was an error, syntax error, unexpected token, blah, 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 blah. Something is not valid JSON. Nojo Sojo, I'm so sorry, but I don't understand your question. Could you try asking it again, please? What is this? What is this that can't be done? So, check it out. Console.error shows us a new, like it goes like, hey, there's an error. Let's take a look at what's in here. So we've got, well, unexpected token, something. And we see also this. The server responded with a status of 404. Let's take it a step further. Let's look at the network. tab, because yeah, we have a network tab. And let me just like bump it so that it does stuff. We can take a look over here. Check it out. I tried to go to authors.jso, and you can see we got a status of 404. That's because this address, authors.jso, does not exist. Yeah. So, oh, wow. Check it out. We even get like, oh, I didn't think we'd find this. Check it out. If we were to try to open authors.jso, we would see this. We can see our reply. It's giving us HTML that's saying like, hey, this page doesn't exist. So that's why the catch is helpful, because what happened is it got to this point here and it's like, hold on, you're trying to tell me to like process JSON, but I've got HTML here. See, notice the opening HTML tag here, and the browsers and the fetch API is like, this isn't valid JSON. So instead of getting all the way to it crashing, we instead catch that error. We say, hey, if you find an error, don't panic. I will handle it. So Nojo clarified by saying, hey, question mark dot to catch undefined. But where's the undefined? Or am I misunderstanding? I'm very sorry. Nojo saying fetch must always enter the catch. It doesn't have to. It's good if it does, in case something messes up. So must is this comes into questions of best practices again. Technically, JavaScript will allow you not to have a catch clause. It is a good idea if you do. Let's move on. Now we can actually start using this data that we've received to populate our user interface or UI. Mehmet says to catch any mistakes. Yeah, because it might not just be a mistake on our end. It could be on our end being the front end developer. It could be a mistake on the end of the back end developer. So our fetch data contains an array of 26 authors. And if we add all of them to the page at the same time, this could lead to poor performance. Maybe you might think like, how is 26 authors going to make it poor performance? Well, for example, it could take very long to load if you have thousands of entries, or to show all of them. Yeah. So what we're going to do instead is add 8 authors at a time, and then use this button load more authors to add 8 more every time until there's no more data to display. So we're going to have 2 variables. One is going to be called starting index. Set that to 0. And ending index, which is also set to 0. No, this will be set to 8, respectively. Notice I'm using let here. Notice I'm saving that question for Q&A. Ooh, check him. I'm going to save your comment too. Super interesting. Thank you. So we're going to do one more, which is let author data r, or array, and set that to be an empty array. So what we're going to be doing is creating indexes so that we can display a certain amount of authors at a time. Let's check our code, pat, and let's move on. So we're going to create a function so that we can populate this data, and we're going to only call it inside this then. The second one, once we have the JSON data, the second then function or callback in line 11. So this will be called display authors, and it will be taking one parameter called authors, and it'll be an arrow function. Looks good. Pat. Let's keep going. Now we're going to do a authors.forEach. So we're going to loop over the authors that we passed to this display authors function. And instead of using the author as a parameter, we're going to be destructuring that author. We've done this a couple times to take, remember, hold on, give me one sec. You can see each of them has an author, an image, a URL, and a bio property. So we can destructure that author to interact with its author, image, URL, and bio. The second parameter of our for each callback will be the index. Remember, we've done this before where you can have more than one parameter for the for each callback. The first being the object we are iterating over itself. The second one being the index of that object, or that array member, I should say. And you could have a third optional one, which is the array itself, a reference to the array itself. By the way, what we're doing here, we're showing a certain amount of authors at a time and then letting it load more. This concept is called pagination. You probably see it in a lot of websites when you're like on social media or something and you reach the bottom and then it loads a couple more. That's because what it's doing is trying to be efficient by only showing a certain amount of posts just to save on internet bandwidth, but also, just in case you don't want to look at that many posts. How's this look? No good. I forgot my arrow. Cool. I hope I'm allowed to not do an implicit return. Yeah. Cool. Pat. Let's keep going. All right. Time to do something we've done before. We're going to go through each author and we're going to append some HTML. And by append, we mean adding to the existing inner HTML of the author container, which you might remember is empty. Yep. And we're going to be doing it with, am I doing it? Empty template literal. Does that look good? Yeah. Ooh, Jane's got one here. I think you also need the curly brackets when there's nothing specified yet. And that's correct. If there's nothing to implicitly return, then your JavaScript is going to crash. Thank you. So now we're going to write some code inside our template literal. We're going to write some HTML. Stuff we've done before, so we'll just breeze through this. So the div, we're going to div with the ID set to. And here we're going to use our $sign syntax to put in the index of that author. The class of this div is going to be user card. Div. So far, so good. I really want to start doing it. I'm a grown-up. I can do it if I want. Display authors data. Check it out. So we've already made the div itself. So there should be, I already lost count of how many there are, 20-something divs. Look at that. That's a lot of divs. Now you understand why we want to space them out with pagination. But we still need to put in the data from that author itself, so we will pat and move right on. Folks, if you have questions, please put them in. I'm saving some for the Q&A at the end and some we're doing inline. So now we're going to show some information about the author themselves. So H2, the class is going to be author-name. There's no ID. And the text inside here is going to be interpolated. That's what this $sign syntax is called, using the author property of that author. If we were to call it now, because we're impatient, display authors, check it out. Huh? Did I do something wrong? Why didn't it? Am I spelling it wrong? Display authors. Data, not authors. See, this is why At some point on a Friday, you just have to be like, that's enough coding for now. But check it out, all of the names are showing up. Yeah, that's exciting. Y'all are too patient with me and my silliness. Cool. That looks good. Pat, pat. Let's move on. Hey, if you want to see the ooh. So now we're going to actually start calling the function to display author. So the first thing we're going to do is remove that, and we're going to say const author. Oh no. That's the let we already have. Author data r is equals to data. Cool. Pat. You might be wondering, like, hold on, where is this from? Remember that a few steps ago we defined this variable. So now it's identical to the data that we console logged a while ago, which of course is not super helpful, but like we're just going to console log to make sure. So console log a string with author data array and the author data r. Whenever I write r like this, I always feel like a pirate. I'm always like r. Author data array, and there's the data itself. Perfect. Yep. Stuff we've done before. And here, now we're going to start using our functionality to paginate. We're going to start implementing our pagination. Instead of passing in all of the data, all of the authors to the display authors function, we're going to cut up a slice of this array. So instead of console logging, we're going to display authors with author data r dot slice. And that slice is going to be taking two arguments. The first one is the starting index of that slice. And the second argument is the ending index of that slice. So what we're essentially saying here is like, hey, instead of using all of the authors, just give me the authors between index 0 and 8. So that's Quincy all the way down to here. If I wanted to display the next 8, or let's say I want to display 2, I want to say go from 9 to 12. I can't count. Those are 3. Then we got Dylan, Tapas, and Zyra. So that's the magic of slicing up an array. You might imagine what we're going to be doing later on. What? Oh, Jane's saying, why does that display 8 people and not 9? Great question. Because the ending index, hold on. Let me get us an index and I'll explain, and I'll illustrate this. Let me make a comment. 0, 1, no. Apple, banana, cantaloupe, clementine. Clementine is much better than cantaloupe. I do like cantaloupe though. Anyway, I need a fruit that starts with the letter D. The dragon fruit. I'm not gonna make Kristen's like. See, Kristen's got me called out. 9 fruits is ambitious. I'm not gonna do 9. We know you like cantaloupes. They're tasty. Oh, durian. I've actually had durian. I liked it. I had it in Thailand. Durian, and 5 is enough. 4 is enough. Now here's the thing. If we start at apple and we end at, sorry, let me try this again. Okay. Oh, cherry is good too. I love cherries. Okay, let's not get distracted. We're starting at index 0 and ending at index 2. So check it out. We started 0, which remember is before Apple. Now we're at index 1. And now we're at index 2. Notice that ending at index 2 only grabs the first 2. Let's try it differently. If I were to slice from index 1 to 3, it would start at index 1, give me banana, now I'm in index 2, then give me cantaloupe, which now we're at index 3, and it stops there. That's why it shows 8 people and not 9. I hope that's helpful. I would love to reassure you, if I may, that I always mess that up. But for now, we'll pat, and we'll keep going. Cool. Let's make our image class, our image element with the class user-img. Checkham says, so right. Slice and splice are tricky. I'm going to go one further. I never remember which one is which. I always have to look it up. Thank goodness for MDN. The source is going to be using interpolation, the image that we destructured earlier. Oh, look at that! Quincy's there. Nice. Oh, it's kind of scary when it's so fast. No, just asking, what is splice? I would love to. I will save that as a bookmark, but I'd also love to ask the chat in the meantime to explain what splice is. Where was I? Alt text. Very important for accessibility to always have alt text. This alt text is going to be the author's name. We don't see it, of course, but if we were to inspect the HTML, which we will in a minute, then it'll show up. Followed by the text avatar. Make sure that there's a space between the author variable and the word avatar. For example, Quincy Larson avatar. Fantastic. Can I close this? So, excuse me. Let's inspect that element. And we can see Quincy Larson avatar. Jessica Wilkins avatar. Fantastic. I feel good about this, and so does Free Code Camp. Pat. Next thing we're going to show are the biographical details about the author. So we will add a paragraph element, which we know to be the element P, class bio, and the content of that P element is going to be the interpolated bio that we destructured from here. Look at that. Teacher who found it, musician and programmer. Kristen, thank you very much. Splice puts stuff in the middle of an array, whereas slice cuts up an array. How's that look? Pat. Cool. Then we're going to add a link to the author's page in Free Code Camp. So the anchor element is A for that's a link. The class is going to be author link. The href or HTTP ref, hypertext reference, or ref, as Jess loves to say, because it throws you somewhere else. I love that. Is going to be the interpolated URL. And we're going to set the target to underscore. Am I doing this right? Yes, blank. Oh my goodness, I cannot type. There we go. Perfect. So we've got the link in there. The thing we need to do next is interpolate as the content of that link, because we don't see it yet. Author apostrophe S. Notice how it's showing up. Author page. Quincy Larson's author page. If you're not familiar, or by any chance maybe you didn't do the web development bootcamp, you might be wondering what target blank is. It essentially tells it, hey, if I click on this link, like without like middle click or right click or like command click or control click, don't take me away. Just open this link in another tab. How's this look? Great. Pat. Mehmet's got it. New tab. Perfect. Cool. So I think we are good to stop because I do want to make sure that we have plenty to do on Monday. I wanted to make sure that we could go step by step here. So we're going to stop here for now. Don't worry, we'll be back on Monday to do some more fetch and promise. Homework. There's no coding homework from me today. The only homework I asked you to do is to take it easy, to be kind to yourself, to let yourself rest in between sessions, to remember that learning takes time. We're going through this boot camp, even though it's been like a lot of months. I lost count. It still takes time. These are meant to be done over time. This is self-paced. You can go as fast as you like. You can go as slow as you like. Remember to collaborate with one another. We have a Discord for that very reason. Okay, let's do some Q&A. So we don't need to use async when we use fetch. So I hope we're going to be learning about async and await in a bit. I will very briefly preview it. The long and short of it is that when we have a function that returns a promise, when we call it, we could do the then thing. But if a function is async, instead of doing then, we can call a function that returns a promise by prepending await. That skips the step of having to do then, and it returns that value into a variable that we can then utilize. I am previewing something very far ahead of time, so please don't worry if this goes over your head. What I'm getting at is we don't need to use async when we use fetch. No, we don't have to, but if we can, then we don't need to do the stuff with then. I hope that answers your question. Oh, you know what? I'm going to take a moment to send the link. So Nojo Sojo's asking, how do we fix these put get errors as a web dev? Great question. When we get errors such as the 404 we just saw, we know, oh, that thing doesn't exist. Maybe I need to find out what it is. A lot of the times an API will have, a lot of the times an API will have documentation. Let me give you an example. You may or may not be familiar with GitHub. GitHub is a website that allows you to store your code online and share it with others. GitHub itself has an API, and I am looking for an example. Give me 1 sec. No. REST API. I want repositories. Yes. No, users. Perfect. Okay. Bear with me, folks. You can use the GitHub API, for example. Hold on. You can use the GitHub API, for example, to get the information of a user, right? A lot of the time, these provide documentation, such as, here's what you should expect if you see a 200. Okay, maybe I picked a bad example. A lot of APIs will, you can also see like what data is coming in from that API. Here we go. Here's you can see what errors you can expect from that API. For example, hey, maybe you're not logged into the GitHub API and we're not going to allow you to get that user's information. Make sure you're logged in correctly. Hey, your user's not allowed to do this. Make sure that you have permission. Hey, you put in the address of something that doesn't exist. Hey, maybe you've been trying to use this API endpoint too many times. Ooh, Mehmet's saying the documents seem quite complicated. Is that normal? Define normal. I'm sorry. The thing about documentation is that it needs to documentation is very difficult. It is a very tricky thing to approach because you need to cater to several audiences at once. It's not just people who are learning to code for the first time, but it's also people who have been coding for many years, and they need to have information such as needing to understand authentication. Hey, how do you make access tokens for GitHub? Because in order to interact with the GitHub API, you need to have what's called an access token. Friends, we haven't talked about access tokens yet, so this might seem quite complicated. So yes, is it normal that they look like this? I'd say so. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Nojo Sojo. Check I'm saying finally is the real ending. So you can have fetch, then catch, and finally. Let's go check out what finally is. So in a promise, when this is a callback that's going to be run when a promise is done, either fulfilled or rejected, either with then or the catch. This is going to be something that's like, hey, no matter what happens, when you're done, do this. But as Checkum says, it's optional. Let's briefly check out what is splice. So let me expand this just a little bit. We've got an array here with January, March, April, and June. We are calling splice on months with the arguments 1, 0, and Feb. That's going to insert February at index 1. Check it out. And it's replacing 0 of them. So March does not get replaced with Feb. That's what splice does. Oh, as Kirsten said, just put stuff in the middle of an array. Jane's asking, is there a way to know all the things that are best practices, such as using catch, accessibility, etc.? Is it something we pick up as we go along learning by osmosis? Is there a way to know them? You do pick them up over time and with experiences, but a lot of these are documented. For example, right here in MDN. Accessibility. They have a dedicated article to talking about accessibility, why it's important, and the best practices thereof. Checkum says, fetch uses the XHTML HTTP request and returns a new instance of the promise class under the hood, which is asynchronous. Async await is the syntax sugar on top of it. Asynchronous JavaScript course, async await promises callbacks on free code comes to YouTube explains it very nicely. Thank you very much. That was a lot of jargon, but I do appreciate it. But I want to highlight what Checkum says here. It's a hard concept to wrap our head around as new devs, so don't worry, you'll get it at some point. Absolutely. Nojo just asking, final runs even if catch runs? I want to say yes, but I don't want to promise anything. Jane says I found a best practices section in MDN. Think about best practices, and I still insist this, they change over time. So the finally method of promise instances schedules a function to be called when the promise is done. It immediately returns an equivalent promise object, allowing you to change calls to other promise methods. This lets you avoid duplicating code in both the promises then and catch handler. So in my opinion, yes, it does run. Philip's asking, could you please explain what sync and asynchronous JavaScript are one more time? Totally. Tell you what, I'll do you one better. Haha, let's fire up Python Tutor. Oh gosh, I forgot how horrible this is. Hold on. Okay. So here's our object. I don't actually know if Python Tutor allows us to do fetch requests. Let's find out. Let me just grab that one from here. Give me one sec, folks. No idea if this is going to work. Let's find out. Okay. Let's watch what happens. Okay, never mind. Fetch is not defined. That's fine. We can't do fetch in Python tutor, and it makes sense, but that's fine. Hear me out. JavaScript is executed each line in order, right? It's not like we define this object, and while that object is being defined, we define this variable. It says, cool, define this object first. Once this is done, do this. Once this is done, do this. Once this is done, do this. This is called synchronous code. It waits for each line to terminate, right? Fetch is different. Fetch sends off a request. That's what fetch does. Fetch doesn't process the request, process the answer to that request. Fetch doesn't wait for that request to be done. That request is asynchronous. Fetch is just like, hey, go get the thing. That promise then says, oh, hey, I got the thing back. Now we can run that response. Checkum says, sync operations are read top to bottom, which make your code blocking for actions like fetching data that take time. Your users have no choice but wait for that operation to be done. Asynchronous runs the rest of your code and then finally does the asynchronous operations. Perfectly put. Whew. Do we have any more questions? No, I think that's it. Hey, it's weekend time, everybody. How are we feeling? I hope fetch and promises seems a little bit less daunting now. If they haven't clicked completely, don't worry. Remember, this is recorded. You can come back. You can come to the Discord and ask questions. Remember, we are all in this together to learn. Thank you all for joining. Have a wonderful weekend. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you the next one. Bye for now.